Tragus Piercings, pros, cons, advantages, disadvantages. Going to be 5 of each. And as a bonus, we're going to go through what you should know before getting it done and look for. Getting the piercing, what it should be like, healing the piercing, jewelry choices, living with the piercing, and what happens if you decide you don't like it anymore. Coming up next on Pros and Cons by a Piercer, Season 2, Episode number 6. So stick around. For those that are new to the channel, my name is DaVo. I'm a professional body piercer and have been since 1994. I own and I operate the Axiom Body Piercing Studio located right here in Des Moines, Iowa, inside Skin Kitchen Tattoo. So, when I talk about these things, I'm talking to you at a level of expertise that comes from being in the body piercing industry for well over 26 years, almost 27. So what we're going to talk about today is tragus piercings. Tragus piercings are named after the part of your anatomy they go through, which is the tragus. It's that flap on the front of your ear that you can push in and it kind of blocks your ear canal. It's done horizontally through that. It can be done, usually one is the most common, but in some cases, if it's large enough, they can do multiple ones. History-wise, there's really not a lot of documentation of anybody prior to modern history doing this particular piercing, but that doesn't really necessarily mean that it wasn't done. It's just there's no documentation of it. The reality with any piercing is if an area of your body protruded or protrudes, somebody probably tried to pierce it at some point. The modern invention probably came about in the late 80s, early 90s. I remember first seeing it around 90, 91 in a Piercing Fans Quarterly International. It was an established piercing that was developed probably at the Gauntlet or one of its offshoots and has been with us ever since. It really didn't gain a lot of popularity, though it's always been a fairly popular piercing. It seems to have shot up right around 2005 for some reason. So, with that out of the way, let's get into the pros and the cons, the advantages, disadvantages, starting with the pros. The things we like about this piercing, the things that you should, that make you want to get it, or, I would suggest getting it. Number 1, this is widely socially accepted. This is not a piercing that is considered freaky or on the edge or extremes. It's one that you can probably get away with wearing in very conservative settings. People will usually not pick up on the fact that you even have this piercing, especially if you have longer hair that kind of covers the area. It's something you can get, one of the non-lobe piercings you can get that isn't going to just scream, I'm a piercing. Number 2, there's a wide, and I mean wide variety of different types of jewelry that can be worn in this particular piercing. From the good old-fashioned rings all the way up to very elaborate labrae studs or barbells or very elaborate ends. You have a lot of things to choose from, a lot of different styles. It really depends if you want something really elegant and simple or if you want something a little more complex and more bold. Number 3, this has a fairly short healing period, usually healing out in about 8 to 12 weeks. If you're lucky, maybe a little bit longer if you're unlucky. It's not prone to a lot of problems, tends to be a fairly easy heal. Number 4, this piercing really enhances the area. Like I talked about earlier, when something protrudes, as humans who are interested in piercing, we tend to go, hey, it protrudes, we can pierce it. This one fits really well into that anatomy and enhances it. Depending on the type of jewelry, it can be very, very detailed and very, very good. Number 5, this piercing has a long history of healing with little or no issue. It's not a very traumatic piercing. It's not an experimental piercing. It is a piercing that a lot of people have had done over the years and have healed it out with little or no issues. Now, with the pros out of the way, let's move on to the cons, the disadvantages, the things that maybe you should consider not getting this piercing. Starting with number 1, this piercing is very hard to isolate. If you think about the location of the piercing and the amount of contact that area gets, it can be a hard piercing to isolate and keep away from things and keep clean. whether it be bedding, clothing, sleeping, earbuds, headphones, scarves, wet hair, etc., it does tend to get a lot of contact with a lot of different things, including makeup. So you really do need to kind of be diligent about isolating this particular piercing during the healing process, especially. Number 2, it can affect your ability to wear earbuds or stethoscopes or anything that plugs into the ear canal. If you think about it, it is located right at the entrance of your ear canal. So anything that has contact to the area is going to be problematic. And in a lot of cases, even after the piercing heals, you can't really put something in there without having issues. The best advice I can give you if you are, like, for example, in the medical industry and you really want this piercing, is you really want to go with a libre stud with a flat back to give you a little extra room to put things in there. If you wear earbuds, you're going to be without them for a while. And stethoscopes also, you would probably not be able to use that ear until it is healed. So know that going in. Number 3, this piercing can close fairly rapidly. It is not a piercing that you can take out and leave the jewelry out for a long period of time without the piercing closing. I only advise taking jewelry out to replace it for roughly the first 2 to 3 years. Even after that, there's always a risk of them closing. Number 4, you cannot sleep on this piercing, even in some cases after the piercing is healed. Usually lower profile jewelry make it a little bit easier, but you may want to consider that your sleeping habits are going to change at least for the foreseeable future, if not indefinitely. So take that into account. If you tend to just fall asleep every day or every night on your right-hand side, you might want to pierce your left because, your left is because you're going to want to sleep on it, and you can't. Number 5, the last one, is not everyone has the anatomy for this particular piercing. Sometimes they're too small. Sometimes they're not deep enough. Sometimes they're not wide enough. Not everyone can get this piercing done. Okay, with that out of the way, the pros and the cons out of the way, let's move on to things you should probably look for. With the pros, the cons, and all that stuff out of the way, let's move on to what you should look for before getting the piercing or when you're getting the piercing. First thing is you should find a piercer that's well experienced, has a lot of experience doing this particular piercing, and seems passionate about what they're doing. That makes you feel comfortable about them doing the piercing. The second thing, the piercer should be professional. They should make you feel at ease. They should be informative. They should give you a consultation that involves things like aftercare instructions, what you're going to need to do to heal it, some of the risks that may be involved with getting this particular piercing. They should evaluate your anatomy to see whether or not your trachea can be pierced safely and have a good success rate. They should probably suggest that you have this pierced with a barbell or stud. They can be done with rings, and I've had many clients heal it out with no issue with rings, but rings have a higher profile, they have more contact, more movement, etc. They tend to be a much harder heal than with a stud. Personally, I like the libre studs because they even reduce the amount of profile on the inside of the ear, making it a little bit easier to dealing with earbuds and etc. later on. Also, they should suggest that the jewelry is oversized or too big for the amount of tissue they're going through. These do swell during the healing process, and you do need that extra room with the jewelry to allow for that swelling. The last thing you should look for is ask them whether or not they give aftercare instructions, both in writing and verbally. I don't understand piercers that don't, and you, as a client, should demand that. Now let's talk about what the piercing experience itself should be like. First off, the first thing they should do, especially when they're marking it, of course, you disinfect the area, we mark it, and then we actually do the piercing. The first thing they should do is discuss if you have any plans for any future piercings in the area. If you're planning on getting multiple tragus piercings, it's very important, especially in the first one, extremely important that you discuss that with them at the time of marking so they can determine whether or not your anatomy is big enough, make suggestions on it, and place the piercing off-center or high or low to allow extra room for that second piercing. Once they've marked the piercing, they should have you do a few kind of, a few different expressions, smiling, etc., frowning, etc., because they want to see how much that area moves when you do that. With some people, their trachea kind of pulls. There's like pressure on the piercing. They also want to look at how that placement looks when your expressions change. Does it fit in there? Does it look foreign? They kind of want to get that eye for what's going to work best for your facial structure and your expressions, because I doubt you're just going to walk around solemn for the rest of your life. Now, this piercing should be done with forceps, and the reason for that is, and you can figure it out on your own, if you take your index finger, put it inside your ear, and pinch down, you'll notice the tissue's kind of thicker and fattier on the outside. It's loose, and it kind of rolls. We call that tissue roll. If you force a needle through there, there's a possibility of that tissue moving, so instead of the piercing going straight through, it ends up at an angle. So compressing that tissue and holding it in place eliminates some of that tissue roll and basically produces a better piercing. So usually they're done from the outside into the ear canal with a needle receiving tube to catch the needle and kind of guide it out of the way and protect all the rest of your ear. Piercing's pretty quick, not very painful. The clamps might apply a little bit of pressure. Sometimes we have to bend the tissue out a little bit, so that can be a tad bit uncomfortable. But it's kind of like a pinch. Putting in the jewelry can be a little complicated. Usually involves a taper pin or guide pin, so that can take a little while to get that jewelry in there and get it closed. There should be some slight to moderate bleeding, or there may be. Don't freak out about that. That means that we have pierced you. We have punctured your body. It bleeds. That's what happens. Now, after the fact, you might have a little bit of throbbing and aching. Usually lasts, most people, about 5 to 10 minutes. After that, it's going to be sensitive to the touch. It's kind of a situation where if you bump it, you're going to know it. And most people, that first couple of days is when they bump it the most. It's basically because they're not used to it being there. Now let's talk a little bit about the healing. Average healing time on this one is 8 to 12 weeks, during which time I'm going to suggest that you clean it twice a day with sterile saline solution. Personally, I like Nelmed's piercing aftercare spray. You want to do that twice daily until it is healed. You want to practice cross-contamination prevention. That means keeping things away from it and avoiding infection. Things like clean your hands before you handle it, no oral contact or exchange of bodily fluids on you around the piercing, keeping your environment clean, clothing, bedding, towels, anything that may come in contact with the piercing. Also, no swimming. Do not submerge piercing in bodies of water you cannot control the quality of, which is everything but your own clean bathtub. You want to keep pets away from it. Don't let them sleep in the bed, especially smaller animals that like to sleep up by your face on the pillow and like to steal your breath while you're sleeping. The other thing is you want to make sure that your hair is completely dry when it comes in contact with the piercing. You want to avoid anything that you put in, like comes out of spray cans. You want to shield it. You do not want to sleep on the piercing. You want to sleep on your other side or your back. Basically, we want to isolate that piercing as much as possible. Some people will have had good success with using a travel pillow by basically the U-shaped ones, and then sleeping with their ear in the center of the pillow. That works for some people it doesn't. Now, it's going to be normal for the first 3 to 5 days to see redness, discolorization, heat, tenderness to the touch, swelling, and some slight bleeding. That's not uncommon. That is your body's reaction to the trauma of the actual piercing itself. Over time, that will fade. If it doesn't, you need to contact your piercer. One last thing, and I've already said this probably 4 times, is no matter how well or how good, or if it, I don't care if it doesn't hurt, do not sleep on the piercing until it's completely healed. The last thing I'm going to talk about is you want to avoid contact with earbuds, headphones, anything that comes in contact with the area until it's completely healed, especially things that put pressure or cause trauma to the area. Now, jewelry options. Basically, the 3 styles that you can wear in this for the most part are standard straight barbells, Libre studs, and possibly rings. Rings have been were the standard when this piercing was developed, like most piercings. The thing with rings is they do need to be oversized to keep that area that's inside the piercing as flat as possible. With Labres and barbells, if you're trying to choose between the two, I would suggest the Labre stud. That flat back will kind of eliminate things being in the way of your ear canal, like balls and etc. And it may make it a little easier to wear things like earbuds and stethoscopes and etc. once the piercing is healed. Now, living with the piercing. First off and foremost, the jewelry should be left in at all times. You should only take jewelry out to replace it. I know a lot of people believe they can take jewelry out and leave it out for extended periods of time or take it out when they're sleeping and all this other stuff. Those are the people that usually develop issues in healed piercings. It's best, and the reason why body piercing jewelry is designed to not be easy to take in and out and to stay in the body for a long period of time, is because it's best to leave the jewelry in. Avoid pressure and trauma on the piercing. Even after it heals, sleeping on it, getting it caught on things, etc., can cause issues. So isolating the piercing should continue even after it heals. Trauma to the piercing can cause damage to it, and it can cause trauma. Reactions to trauma. Like, it's not uncommon that if you bang it just right, that it'll start swelling up even years after it's healed. With earbuds, stethoscopes, and etc., test them. Try wearing them for short periods of time. Make sure that they're well cleaned. Don't share them with anybody else, and just see what the piercing can handle and what your body can handle. Always adjust or change loose jewelry. Because, as I mentioned earlier, we tend to pierce a little bit on the big side. It's a good idea once that piercing is healed to go to a shorter length or a smaller piece of jewelry. Now, lastly, let's talk about abandoning the piercing. Let's say you've had this for a few years and for one reason or another you have to remove it, or you're just grown tired of it. And depending on how long you've had the piercing in, will determine how long that scar tissue will be prevalent. For example, if you got it pierced yesterday and you take it out, then the scarring is going to be small. But if you did it 5 years ago and then you take the jewelry out, there's going to be more scarring, and it's going to take longer for it to heal. Now, this is not negative scarring. What we're generally talking about is an indentation hole about the size of the jewelry. And it will fade slowly over time. When you remove jewelry from a healed piercing, the first thing that happens is your body connects the scar tissue in the center. Then it slowly fills it up. So a lot of times these piercings will appear open, but in reality they're closed in the center. And it takes a long time for your body to completely fill that back up and generate it back to somewhat normal tissue. Thus, you have a scar there. It's not uncommon sometimes for sebums to come out of this. Sebums has like a chalky, white, cheese cream kind of consistency, has a distinct odor to it. Some piercings produce this inside them, and over time it builds up. It's also mixes with dry or dead skin cells. And it can smell bad, and it kind of looks gross, and you squeeze it, and it comes out. This is not something you should be concerned about. Usually just cleaning the piercing area and doing all your normal hygiene's enough. So, that covers tragus piercings. Hope you enjoyed this. Hope you found it edifying. If you did, give us a thumbs up. Let us know that you liked it, because we like it when you like it. If you haven't already, please subscribe, hit that notification bell so that you're notified every single time we post something here on the channel. If you like merch, like this t-shirt right here that I'm wearing, check out our merch store. Link is in the description. Lots of designs, lots of different styles, and lots of different products. And it all goes to support this channel. Till next time, here's hoping all your piercings heal with ease and without a single issue. And if you're in the Des Moines, Iowa area, hope to see if your body piercing needs in the future. Have a good day, everybody. Thank you for watching. Take care of one another, and we'll see you in the next video.